It is January 24, 2026, and the energy transition is no longer a prediction. It's the steep part of the curve. And that shot on screen, a solar farm going in row by row, captures the new reality. This is industrial-scale construction. Here's our roadmap. The record-breaking build-out of 2024 and 2025, the cost collapse driving it, the battery boom covering the evening gap, and the grid bottlenecks that could slow the whole machine down. Let's start with the numbers. For years, renewables climbed steadily. Then, 2023 is where the chart snaps upward. In 2023, IRENA estimates the world added about 473 gigawatts of renewable power capacity. Already, the vast majority of new power capacity added that year. And 2024 didn't cool off. According to IRENA, we added another 585 gigawatts in 2024, about 92.5% of all new power capacity built globally. That donut on screen is basically all green. And while the final global totals for 2025 took time to land, the signal was loud early. Ember estimates global solar installations hit about 380 gigawatts in the first half of 2025 alone, up 64% from the first half of 2024.
It is absolutely unprecedented. China is the headline inside the headline. About 256 gigawatts in 6 months, more than twice the rest of the world combined. When you see an aerial view like this, it finally feels real at grid scale.
This isn't just about building panels. It's changing the power mix in real time. Ember's review of the EU's 2025 power year shows wind and solar at 30% of generation, edging past fossil fuels at 29% for the first time. That's a milestone many people expected later. So why is this happening so fast? It isn't just government policy anymore. Up next, we follow the money. Because the same factories and supply chains scaling this build-out are also why clean power is increasingly the cheapest new option.
Look at that Lazard LCOE chart on screen. For new builds, wind and utility-scale solar are consistently coming in below coal. That's the big shift. New clean generation is, in many cases, the low-cost option.
That is a stark difference on the chart. Just to be clear, are we talking about subsidized prices here?
Unsubsidized, meaning the cost before tax credits. And it's not just about new plants. In the US, multiple analyses find that for most coal units, just keeping them running can cost more than replacing their energy with new local wind or solar.
So what is driving this price crash? Is it just technology getting better?
A lot of it is hardware, especially solar. The global spot price of PV modules fell from roughly the low 20s per watt in 2022 to around 10 cents per watt by 2024, driven by a huge manufacturing oversupply, largely out of China. You can see that cliff on the module price line.
That sounds like a dream for developers, but I assume there is a catch.
There's always a catch. Panels got cheaper, but money got more expensive. Interest rates jumped in 2023, which raised financing costs. Since renewables are front-loaded, lots of capital up front, higher rates clawed back some of the savings.
So it is a tug-of-war between cheap tech and expensive loans. Who is winning?
So far, tech. IRENA's 2025 release of its renewable power generation costs in 2024 report found that 91% of newly commissioned utility-scale renewable capacity in 2024 was cheaper than the cheapest new fossil alternative. That 91% stat on screen is the headline, and it's global.
You mentioned that was a global average. Is the story different here in the United States?
Yes, mainly because of trade and supply chain policy. In mid-2024, U.S. module prices were roughly triple the global spot level. Even with that premium, though, new utility-scale solar often still lands among the cheapest new sources of electricity in the U.S.
But electrons are only useful if they are there when you need them. Does this cheap price account for when the sun sets?
That's the truth serum moment. LCOE is an energy-only starting point, not a reliability-included price. As solar grows, the next panel is less valuable at sunset unless you firm it, usually with batteries or other backup. So the conversation shifts to what that adds, and the bar chart makes it clear. Solar plus storage can be roughly double solar's energy-only cost, sometimes more, depending on duration and grid conditions. But even then, it can still compete with gas peakers, and it often looks better than new coal.
So the economics are forcing the transition, regardless of policy.
Exactly. Clean power won the price war. Now the pace is set by grid build-out, interconnection queues, and the cost of capital, because those determine how fast cheap generation turns into reliable, delivered electricity. The old headline was that renewables are unreliable because the sun sets. The new reality is that energy is being time-shifted. If you look at the duck curve graphic on screen, batteries don't generate power. They move it from when it's cheap to when it's needed.
So we have the time machine. But how big did this actually get in 2025?
It hit escape velocity. Bloomberg NEF's 2025 outlook put global battery storage additions around 92 gigawatts, about 247 gigawatt-hours. And trackers tied to benchmark row motion put the 2025 total north of 300 gigawatt-hours, around 315. That's roughly a 50% jump in a single year. Storage has moved from pilot project to a standard asset class.
That is a massive amount of capacity. But walk us through the mechanics. Beyond just storing power for nighttime, what are these batteries actually doing?
They're doing three critical jobs. First is peak shifting, soaking up cheap solar at noon and discharging it during the evening rush. Second is firming, smoothing the jagged edges when wind or solar output drops suddenly. And third, they provide grid services. They can respond in fractions of a second to help stabilize frequency and support the grid, much faster than thermal plants can ramp.
And are we seeing this globally, or is it just a few wealthy markets?
It's globalizing fast. China is over half of annual additions, with the US around 14% in Bloomberg NEF's 2025 outlook. And 2025 also saw new heavy hitters like Saudi Arabia and Chile climb into the top tier. In places like Chile's Atacama, solar plus storage is increasingly the default build-out. You can see the panels plus battery blocks pattern in the aerial shot. And duration is changing too. 2 to 4 hours is still common, but 8-hour projects are starting to show up, alongside longer duration builds being developed in markets like the UK and Australia.
So the technology is ready and the economics are working. But you mentioned earlier that we can't just plug these in anywhere.
Exactly. You can buy the batteries, but you still have to connect them. The bottleneck isn't the technology anymore, it's the wires, and the ability to get a spot on the grid, which is what that transmission map is really showing.
We've seen record growth in solar and batteries, but there's a bottleneck that can choke all that progress, and it isn't the technology, it's the grid. You can often build a utility-scale solar project in about 1 to 2 years, but getting it connected can take years longer, sometimes close to a decade. The IEA estimates at least 3,000 gigawatts of renewable projects awaiting in grid connection queues worldwide. That's a backlog measured in terawatts. And it's not just paperwork, it's physical, steel, copper, cables, and especially transformers. The IEA reports lead times for large power transformers stretching up to about 4 years. When the grid can't expand fast enough, operators curtail. They tell wind and solar farms to dial down, even when the resource is there, because there's nowhere for the electricity to go. And in some places, it's already big. In Chile, wind and solar curtailment in 2024 was about 6 to 7% of total electricity. roughly a fifth of renewable generation. On the island of Ireland, renewable dispatch down can reach the teens, and in Northern Ireland it was about a quarter in 2024. Britain has also seen close to 10% of planned wind output curtailed in 2024. The good news is grid operators are changing the rules. In Great Britain, the National Energy System Operator rolled out a major connections reform in December 2025. Their queue had swelled past 700 gigawatts, about 4 times what Great Britain needs for its 2030 clean power target. So they shifted away from first come, first served toward a first ready approach. In plain English, projects now have to prove they're real: land, permits, financing, so the queue isn't clogged by zombie applications. The US is dealing with the same physics. Berkeley Lab finds the median time from interconnection request to operation for projects built in 2023 was about 5 years. And that's just for the projects that actually make it through. Generation is ready and getting cheaper. But the delivery system, wires, substations, transformers, and the rules to connect wasn't built for a world adding clean power this fast. So as we look toward 2030, the pace won't be decided only by how many panels we can manufacture. It'll be decided by how fast we can clear the queues and build the grid to carry the power. So, where does this leave us as we look toward 2030? The IEA's latest outlook says renewables are on track to become the world's largest source of electricity, overtaking coal around the end of 2025 or by mid-2026 at the latest. In the IEA's main case, renewables add about 4,600 gigawatts of new capacity from 2025 to 2030. Roughly the combined installed power capacity of China, the EU, and Japan. And by 2030, renewables rise from about 32% of global electricity in 2024 to about 43%. We're ticking off milestones fast. Wind and solar were about 15% of global electricity in 2024, already ahead of nuclear. And the IEA expects them to push above 19% by 2026. But there's still a gap between the current path and the global goal. At COP28, countries pledged to triple global renewables to at least 11,000 gigawatts by 2030. The IEA's main case lands around 9,530 gigawatts, short of the roughly 11,500 gigawatts implied by tripling. And the direction matters. The IEA's 2025 update revised the 2025-2030 build-out down about 5%, around 248 gigawatts less capacity than last year's forecast. That's what policy shifts, permitting delays, and grid bottlenecks look like in the numbers. So the technology curve is bending fast. The question for the rest of this decade is simple. Can the grid and the rules that govern it bend fast enough to keep up? Because without more wires, substations, and faster interconnection, the 2030 story stays stuck on a slide.